Hi everyone who's watching. Bloody hell, we've scored an interview with Clive Lewis, MP for Norwich South. Thank you very much, Clive, for being with us today. JT, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So I wanted to read to you a tweet. I think it was from yesterday. You said Common Market 2.0. Do you remember the tweet?
Yes, I do, and I think I'm in trouble for it because
really?
the leader's office have been phoning me, and I've not taken the call. But let's not discuss that, shall we?
I mean, you okay for me to read this?
Yeah.
Crack on. So Common Market 2.0. Jeremy Corbyn talks to former Tory ministers. This would be a grave error on our part. It's not Labour's job to help the Tories deliver Brexit. We tried, they blew it. Now own this mess. It's our job to now stop it. And I guess I wanted to ask on the back of that you've been a Jeremy Corbyn supporter for a long time, but that sounds a bit less so, maybe kind of in the light of recent events with Brexit.
So first of all,
Yeah.
when people say people like to put you in a box.
Sure.
So I've always been quite clear. I've never really bought into the kind of cult of personality that some people do in politics, whether it's Corbyn, I mean, Ed Miliband tried it, whether it's Blair, Brown, whoever, the kind of cult of personality. I understand it's a necessity of a modern political system, which is where you have the kind of the cult of the leader, the leader takes those decisions. But I've never been, so in terms of being a Corbyn supporter, it's always been about the political project.
Sure.
And people might think, oh, he's trying to get out of this, but it's always been about the political project. And Jeremy Corbyn represented a fundamental change in the political and economic kind of structure of how the Labour Party, what the Labour Party was advocating. It was a move from kind of the love affair of neoliberalism with kind of Thatcherism and deregulation and low taxation, and a shift back towards what I would call democratic socialism, i.e. democracies having more say over markets and employment and that kind of whole approach. So I think Europe cuts across political divides. I think that's really clear.
Sure.
And what Jeremy Corbyn and the leadership have tried to do is they've tried, I think quite rightly, over the past 2 years to say, okay, that was the outcome of the referendum. We now have a job to try and minimise the impact, the destructive impact of Brexit, but deliver that outcome. So they've tried. But Theresa May and the Conservatives have used every opportunity they've had, including a general election, to try and push through the most toxic Brexit, Tory Brexit possible, with the red lines and so on and so forth. And Labour's tried to ameliorate it, they've tried to kind of soften it and so on. They said no, no, no. And now Theresa May finds herself with the clock ticking down with her back to the wall. And I don't think it's the job of the Labour Party, having tried that for the past 2 years, to now offer her a lifeline for a soft Brexit, if you want. Because to be quite frank, there is no such thing as a jobs first Brexit.
Yeah.
It's all going to be bad for the economy, it's bad for my constituents. So what I'm saying there is to Jeremy and to the leadership, our policy is quite clear. The time for ameliorating Brexit is over. Now is the time to fight, to say, okay, it's time to give people a say on the deal that Theresa May has negotiated and got through Parliament, and it should be between that and Remain. And that's where I sit. And, you know, no one voted me to go into politics and to kind of sit down and shut up and be quiet, which I never do.
Okay, I mean, fantastic. And off the basis of that, I guess I'd say, off the top of my head, there was an article in The Guardian, I think it was the 1st of January, it was kind of saying like a people's vote said that of the Labour members, 72% wanted a second referendum. You know, I'm not saying that statistic is to be taken as gospel, but in light of that, why do you think that Jeremy Corbyn took so long to say outwardly that he would support a second referendum?
I think, first of all, get the language right. When we talk about second referendum, we're not about talking about asking the same question again.
Sure.
I think most people, when I resigned over signing Article 50, it wasn't the principle of signing Article 50, it was the terms and conditions in which the lack of guarantees that Theresa May gave that this wouldn't be a hard Tory Brexit turned out. I think I was right. And you know, the whole 2 years have been a battle between Parliament and her trying to drive forward that agenda. Ultimately, though, when we talk about a second referendum, we're talking about what we would call a ratification vote, And I think that ultimately is what the policy says is the place that we should now be at, that the British public should have the final say on whatever deal is negotiated. You can't get to that point until you've seen the deal that's come back. And it's constantly coming back. It's still coming back because you're still negotiating. But I think most people have a broad understanding of the backstop and of the various elements of that deal, what it looks like, and have now formed an opinion. And will form an opinion if there is a second referendum ratification campaign. Now, I think the point was, why has it taken so long to get to that point? Look, I think you have to understand, there are a lot of people in this country, yes, they may have changed their minds, but there's still a lot of people in this country who voted hand on heart for something they thought and believed in, which was to leave the European Union. I just don't think a ratification vote is a betrayal of that, because what you're saying is, well, here's the deal on the table, this is what's been negotiated, it might not be what you thought it was going to be, but here is what's come back, what do you think about it? Are you prepared to make such a major fundamental jump into the dark with this new deal, or do you want to stay and remain inside the European Union? And I think that's a perfectly legitimate point to get at. Unfortunately, you couldn't reach that point until a lot of negotiations had taken place and the deal came back. And he and the leadership have been trying to square that circle.
Sure.
Okay. Just to follow up on, well, not follow up, but talk about the independent MPs that have recently left the Labour Party. Have you ever been tempted maybe to go independent, or but you've already supported Jeremy Corbyn in your opening statement there and things, but do you see the appeal of what the independents are doing, or do you think that it's a fundamentally wrong decision in which they made?
I think it's a fundamentally wrong decision, and I'll explain to you why.
Yeah.
Centrist politics, I understand when you're in a kind of political and economic equilibrium position where the economy seems to be working and things are going all right, you can understand why you would want to be a centrist politician, because you wouldn't want to rock the boat. It's about tweaking political and economic consensus, which seems to be working. Now, whatever we think of the political and economic consensus of the last 40 years, up until 2008, the financial crash, both Labour and the Tories kind of conceded that the kind of neoliberal, deregulated, low taxation economic model was the one that worked. So centrist politics, fighting for the centre ground of British politics, was where we were. But we're now in a fundamentally different situation. We're in a situation where we've got a climate crisis upon us, where we've been told by science that we have 10 years to halve the amount of carbon that we're putting into the atmosphere, greenhouse gases, and halve it again 10 years after, and halve it again 10 years after that, if we're to hit 1.5 and below. That's a fundamental change. We've got biodiversity loss. We've got the other 8 planetary boundaries: nitrogen, water, population now being breached. This is a race against time, and that means that incremental centrist change, isn't going to be enough in the timescales we're talking to be able to make the radical change we want to see. That's why the government, I think, when they backed a vote to expand Heathrow, are in complete denial that the economic model that they're championing, the status quo, can deal with the climate disaster, the biodiversity disaster that is facing us. It's also one of social justice, social and economic justice. You look at France and the Yellow Vest movement, and this is one of social justice. So they've tried to bring in carbon taxes, but they've fallen disproportionate to the poorest. So what this tells me is that any change to be able to rectify and resolve and put our economy and society in a more equilibrium, into an equilibrium position, is going to take a radical change in the time that we're talking about. It'll be both social, economic, and ecological. If you're a centrist, if you've got Anna Soubry on one side and Luciana Berger on the other, it's all about a very narrow level of compromise. Because Anna Soubry isn't going to accept radical change to a political and economic system which she is wedded to politically. So, therefore, by its very nature, those centrists do not have the answers. Technocratic, small-scale, incremental fixes will not solve the problems that face our world. So that's why I think inherently they will fail.
Yeah.
Okay. The next question, I guess, would be the point of the show that we kind of made is to be aimed at students who maybe feel a bit like disenfranchised with politics at the moment, considering everything that's happened with Brexit.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a sentiment, especially on our campus, of people who kind of feel completely removed from politics and have stopped caring to an extent. What would you say to students who feel like that?
This is where I say, where's the camera? This
Yeah,
camera
exactly.
on? So I'm talking to the camera. So what I would say is, so 2 years ago, I remember in the 2017 election, there was a sense of, even though it was quite dire, there was a sense of hope. People felt politically engaged because many people felt Brexit happened to me. I might not have been old enough to vote, or I might have missed the vote, or I might have voted but not been politically active. But I'm going to make sure in the 2017 election, with the rise of Corbyn and so on, I'm going to stop that Tory hard Brexit and that Tory domination. And I think younger people particularly felt enthused by that, enthused by the policies, and that seems to have dissipated, partly because of the Labour Party's position on Brexit, I think has been a factor in that. Also the mess that's been made, and then also I think the growing impending crisis in climate and the environment makes people think, my God, what's happening? I feel completely powerless, and politics doesn't seem to have any of the answers on the big issues that matter. But here's the thing, politics isn't just about putting a cross in a box once every 4 years. It isn't just about hitting a button and sending a message to your MP, I don't like this, or I want you to do that, as important as that is. It's also about what you do in between. And one of the things I'm really clear, especially when it comes to the kind of real radical change that needs to take place in climate change and other biodiversity loss, for example, is the fact that radical change never comes from the top. It's politicians never go, let's have some radical change. It comes from the bottom up. It comes, no real meaningful change ever comes without demand. And I think unless people understand that they need to be part of a movement, whether that's the Green New Deal movement, which I think will grow, whether that's the children at school who are part of the youth strikes now, climate youth strikes, which I think will only grow, whether it's the Extinction Rebellion, whether it's the environmental movement generally, whether it's a kind of broader political kind of sense there, people need to be part of a movement, need to engage with what's going on, and unless they do that, then I think that we will head to a cliff edge. So it's about people watching programs like this, but also thinking, what can I do? What part can I play in making sure that change happens? Because it's just not going to happen by people going, it's really crap what's happening, isn't it? And it's going to only change when people demand that change, and that means becoming politically active to make that happen. It's not an easy answer. I think people want an answer which is, if you go to this app and push this, and this will change politics. You know, like most things in life, the best things in life tend to, a degree, for example, something that you've committed your life to. It's not going to come easy, and the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. Politics and democracy is exactly the same. The more you put into it, the more you get out of it.
I just have one more question.
Yeah.
Have you had any others?
No, you.
So I guess the last one would kind of be, we've touched kind of briefly on, biodiversity, climate change. It's obviously a huge issue right now. Do you think that kind of considering this like neoliberal hegemony that we live in, that radical systemic change is possible and it's not too late already?
So yes, I do.
Sure.
And I'll tell you why I do. In 1945, working people were able, in conjunction with the then Labour coalition government in the mid-40s, in 1945, people, soldiers, marbles who'd been working in factories, the electorate demanded something better than what had come before the Second World War, and they created a new political hegemonic consensus. Hegemony means basically, I suppose, complete domination of an idea or of a way of thinking. It's kind of transparent power, and it was so powerful. Even Churchill and the other Tories that came after, up until '79, basically brought into that paradigm. Basically, there was an escalation, a policy war as to who could fund the NHS more, who could fund public services, who were better champion of that welfare state. Variations on it, of that model, but it was a kind of a social market model, the welfare system. '79 changed all that, and the paradigm flipped into the neoliberal model, and again, both Social Democratic, Labour Party and Conservative parties centre-right parties across Europe basically began to buy into a new hegemony, which was rampant consumerism, low taxes, deregulation. The rest is history, and you know that. Well, again, we need another flip, and those flips don't just come from the top down, they do come from the bottom up as well. So I think that it is possible, now that people understand the necessity for it, if the public are sufficiently informed and hungry enough for that to happen, they'll make that political space. If I told you 3 years ago that, or 4 years ago, that we will be leaving the European Union because Nigel Farage would have achieved that, most people would have laughed. I mean, I know it sounds, I know you were, no, I would have believed it, but that, I remember 3 years ago when I first got into Parliament, I remember seeing some of the kind of hardcore Eurosceptics with their ring binders with all the little, all the details in it. They're just completely off the scale. They really are. Like kind of, and now they're running the show in effect. They have moved this country. UKIP and others have moved this country to a cliff edge, arguably, which just without even electing one single MP. And I think so radical change can happen in a very short space of time. The fact that it has to happen, if we're to save, for future generations, means that I have confidence that if it can happen in the past, it can happen now, especially if we're in a desperate situation like we are.
Sure.
So yeah, have hope. It can happen.
Optimism.
Optimism.
Exactly.
There's no alternative. There isn't, Tina. There is no alternative.
Yeah.
We have to have optimism because without it, we might as well just go and sit in lay in our beds and rock and give up.
And just let it happen. But that's it's not going to.
Yeah, and I think there are some people, even if we have reached tipping point on climate, there's still everything to fight for in minimising how far that tipping point goes over. So the whole nature of tipping points is you can't tell what's going to come next. It's unpredictable. But I would still say that the more we do, the more resilience we can build into our democracy, the more resilience we can build into our infrastructure, into global food supplies, the better chance more people have of surviving those tipping points, if that's possible. So how can we best prepare ourselves for whatever's happening? And I think there's no point just saying, oh, well, it's going to happen, we might as well sit back and take it. Actually, there's everything to fight for, even if it is quite dire.
Sure. Okay.
Well, I just want to personally thank you, Clive, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
No, it's fantastic to be here, and it's really good. I always love doing student TV. No, it's good. And the questions you've asked, it's very, very rarely in interviews do you get the time to kind of elaborate the soapbox. It's good to have that.
Well, policies are super important to us, and to get the actual, it's nice to hear an MP so open about climate change and talking about it. We don't hear it enough, I don't think.
But it's my job. I think it's my job as an MP. It's also my responsibility on the front bench, sustainable economics. But this is a passion of mine, whether I was on the front bench or not. It takes a little while to get into politics to work out where you're going to go. But I now know that this is my passion. And I think a lot of people go, oh, you've only come lately. Caroline Lucas has been doing that for a long while. Well, I'll be working with her because actually, she was a voice in the wilderness for a long time, but there are an increasing number of MPs who I think get this now and understand, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, hopefully we'll snowball.
Yeah.
As more people kind of realise.
Yeah, exactly. Let's end on that note.
Well, brilliant. Thank you very much, Clive.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. As more people kind of realise. Yeah. Exactly. Let's end on that note.